All right. What does it do, comics fam? Okay, I told you in my intro video that I sometimes wanted to get kind of philosophical on it, and today is one of those days. Today I want to talk about separating art from the artist. And before we get into that topic, I think it's important that I tell you a little bit about myself to provide some context and then explain why I think this is an important topic to address. Okay, for one, starting with me, I am a comics reader. Hello. Um, and for most of my childhood, for actually quite a bit of my young adulthood, I was a Marvel reader. I'm wearing this shirt for a reason. And, the reason that I eventually stopped reading Marvel and now I'm reading mostly Image and a little bit of stuff from Dark Horse. That's probably an oversimplification, but that's about it. We can talk about all that in depth in another video if I get some feedback that that's an interesting topic. But anyway, moving on. So I read Marvel. I don't know if you guys can see that in the background, but that's my uh, bookshelf full of comics. Roughly a bookshelf's worth of Marvel from all the years that I spent reading that. There's some extra in storage. And for those of you who are also Marvel or DC, big two superhero comic book fans, you will know that a few years back, there was a big discussion in the comics world about representation and whether or not we had enough black, brown. I don't know the exact terminologies that but there weren't enough gay superheroes, there weren't enough black superheroes, there weren't enough Muslim superheroes, and because the facts of the matter are that is basically true in terms of representation for the comic book industry at that time. Everybody came down on the side that representation matters and we need to make some changes. And, as you can tell from my discussion of it, I'm on the side of that as well. But part of the reason that we're having this discussion is that I have an opinion that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, to go about it. That there is a way to introduce these concepts and achieve these states of representation that reach people and ways of doing it that alienate people. And that it is my opinion that if you make these sorts of efforts in a way that doesn't reach your audience, it doesn't matter and it doesn't count in the ways that, say, a Black Panther, which most people think is pretty great, counts in most people's minds. That situation caused quite a bit of an uproar, because anytime there's big change, people are going to have opinions. It's just how things work. And so that coupled with, at the time, Marvel was doing something which I will equate to power creep in games or power escalation in something like Dragon Ball Z. They were trying to continually up the ante because that's kind of how superhero comic books work in a lot of ways. And part of their marketing strategy at the time was to do crossover events that weren't just back in the day. You would see Spawn and Spider-Man. I don't know if that is or is not. Don't at me. Spawn and Spider-Man on a cover for an example, and that would be your crossover event for that summer for those companies or whatever. But Marvel was doing universe-spanning events, meaning that if you wanted to really follow in depth all of these events that were happening at least once a year at a certain point, you would have to not just buy the series that you're into because they would obviously be embroiled in this universe wide event, but you would have to go buy She-Hulk and Squirrel Girl and, Spider-Man, and I know there's going to be some cross section of the people watching this that are like, but those are the comic books that I'm already reading. But that's my point. No matter who you were sucked into buying a bunch of comic books that you otherwise wouldn't be reading. And that's a lot of money, energy, and time that you're asking people to invest. And the combination of that and the drama outside of comics made me kind of start gravitating away from Marvel Comics because I read comic books as an escape, as a way to be somewhere else in my mind for a little while. And when there's so much of the real world wrapped up in not only the story that I'm reading, because all of a sudden everything has to be topical in my superhero comic books, but also there's this huge discussion. So like the meta sphere of comic books was it was just so chaotic. I didn't read comic books for a couple of years because I didn't know what else to do because I'd been reading superhero comic books for like a really long time. And it wasn't until my parents got me into Saga. They bought me the first couple of volumes one year for Christmas as a Christmas present. They had gone down to my local comic book store, Dr. Comics and Mr. Games on Piedmont Avenue in Oakland, California. In case anyone's listening, they're the shit. Go check them out. And so, like, I've been shopping there since I was a kid. So when they went in and asked about me, I had the good fortune of having a comic book staff that knows who I am and is at least somewhat familiar with my tastes, because they've had the same ownership for a super duper long time since my childhood, and people tend to stay working there. So a lot of people I'm friendly. I have relationships with them. That's something you might not have, but that's something I have. And so my parents got me into Saga, and it's not like anything I'd ever read before. It's kind of its own thing. And like anything that is a brand new flavor, I, took a moment to acclimate to it. But once I had acclimated to it, I decided I really, really liked this. And so because I'd really liked this, I went back to my comic book store and asked them about it, and that's how I got where I am now. So, to move on to why I think this is an important topic to discuss, it's kind of really just a few reasons. The main reason is that it is my belief that art needs to be pure. Art needs an artist's ability to express theirself is paramountly important. It's the same right that we're discussing when we're discussing the First Amendment. And if I need to discuss it, like if I need to explain it further than that to you, I doubt that you'll jibe with me or what I do on this channel at all. Not that I don't want you around, but just being real. The next is that people that disagree with you might make art that speaks to you still, and vice versa. I'm going to bring up some examples of that in the body of this video. But suffice to say, I know of plenty of artists who I do not like or respect on a personal politics level, but still think are excellent writers and enjoy what they create. The same as I am aware of plenty of writers who I think I would like. Like if I met them in a bar or a coffee shop and hung out with them and whatever, I think we would get along and probably vote similarly. But they don't necessarily make art that I like. And that's okay because it's art for somebody else. And it needs a place to exist because it should exist if there's somebody out there that likes it. But yeah, so that is why this is an important topic of discussion and why we should be having this discussion right now. All right, fam. So, separating art from the artist is a topic that I want to approach from two directions. The first is boycotting stuff you don't like, and the second is stuff that people that you would probably like and agree with make, and you don't want it just because it doesn't speak to you or you think it's bad. So, the first lens I want to talk about this issue through is Ender's Game. Ender's Game, for those of you who have not read the book or the comic book version or watched the movie, Ender's Game is a story by a guy named Orson Scott Card, and Ender's Game is the story of a future society where you can only have two children per family because of overpopulation issues. And if you want to have like a third baby, it's only possible under certain circumstances with this whole, you have to get like government approval. Because in this future, they are at war with an alien species. And so kind of like all of human society revolves around the war with this alien species. And the story of Ender's Game follows a third. I might be getting that terminology wrong. It's been like super long since I read it. But Ender, his name is Andrew Wiggins, but everyone calls him Ender by the end of the story because he's so good at war. He ends people. It's a story of a family who gets government approval to have a third child because they think that they've already had two children and neither one of them is just right for the thing they need, but they're like super close and super geniuses, and so the family gets permission to make a third child, and he wins them the war. And the controversy here is that Orson Scott Card, the person, is very homophobic. He's bigoted against the gays. He doesn't just not like gay people. Like legit, this guy was at some point in the 90s in front of Senate trying to influence anti-gay marriage legislation and probably other stuff. I don't know everything about the guy. I know he's a bigot. That I don't need to know everything about why he's a bigot and who he's bigoted against. The point is, because he's bigoted, when in, I believe it was 2013, that's when this article was written, and my memory's bad and I'm not going to research it further than that because who gives? When the movie came out, people wanted to boycott the movie because Orson Scott Card, the guy who wrote the book that the movie is based on, is a bigot, and they didn't want bigots to get large movie checks. And I'm not sure where I fall on this because, like, I don't personally like the guy, but like, maybe it's personal bias. Maybe it's the fact that Ender's Game and the series that it spun out into, which is like I think a dozen books at this point, maybe more. I got into it when I was a kid, so like before I really learned to develop opinions about how I feel about bigoted people, I already had the whole book series, you know? So maybe it's maybe that colors this a lot. But the more important thing, like boycotts did happen. Like people pushed this idea, but the more important thing that I want to touch on is this other bit here. Sorry, I don't know why this is. Boycotts were dumb for one reason that and people can't initially be faulted for. Most people wouldn't know this, and I don't blame the people involved for. I mean, maybe I don't know the whole ins and outs. I don't know how big an organization it was to boycott this. I know boycotts were bandied about, but unbeknownst to them, Orson Scott Card had sold the rights. That's how a movie gets made. You sell the rights, and sometimes that selling of the rights involves you like having residuals, or I don't know the legal terms. You sometimes you can make money off the movie when it happens. Sometimes you even get to be a part of the process of making the movie. In the case of Ender's Game and Orson Scott Card, he was not going to make any money from the movie because he had sold the rights without that clause in there, and he was in no way involved in the production of the movie in any way. And in fact, the cast and crew, were part of the Hollywood crew that is very liberal minded, and they didn't like him either. And they went to kind of great lengths to make it clear to the audience that this movie had nothing to do with him, and that if you were concerned about not letting a bigot make money, that was not going to happen here. And so the first lens I want to look at this through is kind of like, first, know how you're trying to affect a person, and as Sun Tzu would say, be effective in your actions. He'd probably say it more eloquently than that, but that's not what this video is about. So, but the other thing is, do we really want to live in a place where we only consume art from people who we agree with? Do you want to live? Do you want to live in a world where you only consume art that's liberally minded if you're a liberal, or conservatively minded if you're a conservative? And B, if you're a creator who is, like politically minded, who has strong opinions about this, do you want me to not buy or enjoy your creations if I don't agree with who you are? Because let's move on to the next. That's a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, is Ethan Van Sciver and Cyberfrog. Cyberfrog is a comic that Ethan Van Sciver created, wrote, and drew for an independent comic book company that hardly anyone's heard of unless you're a Vampirella fan, called Harris Comic Books. Way, way, way back in the 90s. Like 95, 97-ish. Then, round about the time that he was starting to get noticed for that, is when he got his first deal to work for DC. And because it's really difficult to make money in that industry, especially back then, you jump at any opportunity you get, is where I'm going with this. He jumped on the opportunity because it was his foot in the door, but because of the contract, the way record companies and everybody back then did contracts was, the publishing company owns the rights, and it's just a way to screw over creators and keep them at arm's length from the things they created and the ability to make money from them. Long story short, there was a whole thing about a contract that if the Harris didn't use Cyberfrog for X amount of time, I don't remember, and it doesn't matter. The point is, eventually, now Ethan has gotten back the rights to Cyberfrog and had been planning to do this for a long time. He had hoped to publish this comic book at DC, where he had been working for, I don't know how long, but like a long time, and like if you're a DC fan, you know his work. He's worked on a ton of really big projects, and he's one of the best artists in the game currently. Maybe ever. He's an amazing artist. I don't care how you feel about him as a person. You cannot take away from this man that he is a incredibly talented artist. And that is why I did, in the 90s, when I found Cyberfrog the first time, love Cyberfrog, and still am now excited. You can see on the screen the links to his two Indiegogo campaigns for Cyberfrog, which I backed both of because Cyberfrog is a really amazing story. I'm not going to go into it now because this video is already going to be long as heck, and I don't want to waste more time, but it's a great comic book. You should check it out. And that's my thing. Ethan kind of at the point where he wanted to bring this comic book back was starting to get a lot of flack in the industry because he is an outspoken Republican, and this isn't an industry that is very welcoming to that. So he ended up striking out his own. If you are at all aware of him and what he's doing his own thing, all caps comic books. But Cyberfrog is great. You should check it out because Ender's Game is the story of a child war prodigy that goes and wins a space war against a race of alien bugs. It's sci-fi. It's supposed to be weird. And Cyberfrog is the story of a living cybernetic half frog being that's a superhero. I mean, it's what about any of that sounds like anti-gay propaganda? And you should vote for Trump. I mean, like that's what those people who created this art are, but that's not what their art is. And they're good stories. They might speak to you. You might get something from them. Conversely, you might be dealing with something like the New Warriors, which my computer will eventually show you. Here, let's see if I can get a shot of the... Okay, and this is a great shot to illustrate what is the issue with this. If you're a comic book fan in your 30s to maybe early 40s and stuff, maybe a little older than that, you might have read The New Warriors. It was one of my favorite comic books when I was a kid. It had a really diverse cast. It had an interesting vibe, interesting powers, and because of that, it's been rolled into one of like the you see the X-Men, you see the Avengers, you see the Justice League, and I don't know DC as well. Don't at me. I'm sure there's a bunch of teams that I'm not. But like my point is, the New Warriors became one of those recurring, recasted team books that you see in Marvel or DC. And the most recent iteration of the New Warriors, you can see that the 5 characters at the bottommost part of the cover. I will kind of put them a little bit more front and center because they're what we're talking about. Now, from left to right, we have, let's see if I can remember the names of these guys. That's Snowflake, Safe Space, Screen Time, Trailblazer, I want to say, and B negative. Now, the original New Warriors was a really interesting collection of people who were supposed to kind of like be a younger, hipper version of the Avengers. Some of them had ties to the Avengers. Namorita, Namor's younger female cousin, was one of them. And let me go back up just for a second so we can see who I'm talking about. And Night Thrasher, the dude in the awesome black and red suit that you're looking at in the middle there, was their leader. I like to call him Black Batman. It's essentially what he is. Look him up. You'll see that the similarities to Batman from how he operates to his backstory are uncanny. He's a great character with a great power set and a cool attitude. Now what we have is Snowflake, who is like the whole reason that Snowflake exists is like it's a joke on people calling people snowflakes, and her power is that she makes snowflakes, throws them like ninja stars and shit. It's and her. I want to say I read that it's supposed to be her twin brother that Safe Space is, and Safe Space, who if you read some of the like marketing material for it, is described by the people who made this as like he's supposed to be like this masculine, like manly man dude. His power is that he can make like force fields, but he can only use them to protect other people. And then we have screen time. Screen time is just some dumb. I'm not going to go too much further, but screen time is a dumb joke about he got his powers from secret experimental internet gas. Literally, like you're gonna hear this if you haven't seen stuff on this already. I think I'm making that up, but that's literally how he got his powers. That's how they word it. I got Trailblazer here, who's like, I forget what marginalized identity they said she had. She's supposed to represent whatever that one was, and she got her powers from, she has a magic backpack, which I theorize is a joke on the whole unpacking the invisible knapsack line that was like going around the internet really much for a few years. And then B negative. B negative is like Kid Morbius. He's a vampire who's super emo, so he has a dumb name. I'm not even gonna try to be. It's just like I'm sure the person who made this is somebody that I would like if I ran into them into a bar and I heard them talking about comic books. We'd talk and we'd like, we'd vibe and whatever. Like I'm sure it's probably some person that is very similarly minded to me. But back to I was gotten into Saga. Saga is a story about like people and their experience living the life that they live. And the reason that it can have a whole arc about a transgender character is that that's not weird. It doesn't deviate. It doesn't necessitate the story deviating from what it is as advertised. That is what Saga is about. It can be really awkward to try to shoehorn certain things into stories, and there's ways that connect with the audience and ways to do it that do not connect with the audience. Something that I want to bring up as something that really doesn't connect with me is this new thing that happened where apparently now it's heavily implied that Wolverine is a part of the Cyclops Jean Grey couple. Now they're a truple, I think is there's a new word for it. It's either truple or something else ridiculous. But like I don't have a problem with this concept. I've read tons of stories and comic books that have relationships like this, and it's not weird because those comic books, those stories were about that stuff, like Saga is. But this is three characters that have existed since at least the 50s. They've got years and years of established canon of, in the case of specifically Wolverine and Cyclops, being antagonistic to the point where there's a whole crossover where they have like a civil war. It's like basically Civil War 2 Wolverine versus Cyclops. So it's weird all of a sudden that these are the characters that you're using to try to shoehorn a gay agenda into like the story to be representative of that marginalized group when the X-Men has gay characters that they just don't use. There's good characters out there. They're not X-Men, but Wiccan and Hulkling are. I really like the Young Avengers. Your mileage may vary. You might not like the Young Avengers. That's not the point. The point is that story wanted to have a way to address the issue. The point of the Young Avengers was to, while still being an Avengers title, find a way to incorporate newer identities and topics. And one of the ways that they did that was by creating Wiccan and Hulkling, who ended up being a gay couple. I really like that storyline. I love these characters. I think they're both really well written, and because of the way that it was written, it's not weird. It's not jarring. That like people on those teams date each other. Like in that same storyline, Patriot and did they just call her Hawkeye? I think they just call her Hawkeye. Another it's a man and a woman this time, but like there's another couple within this same Young Avengers team. Like people on superhero teams, like they do these arcs where two characters date either for a little while or a long while, and it's not weird when it's done right. Like, let's talk about representation. My favorite way of talking about this, my favorite thing that I like to bring up when talking about this, is the Wrecking Crew. Because, like I said earlier, there are ways of doing representation that reach the audience, that speak to people, and ways that fail to. And the ways that fail to don't count. People don't count it. Like, guys, my black audience out there, please let me know. Do you identify with Piledriver more because he's the black dude in the Wrecking Crew? Because that would be stupid, because Thunderball is the black guy in the Wrecking Crew. Piledriver is one of the other ones. He's one of the two that isn't the Wrecker. Okay, like my point is, it doesn't matter. These are very one-dimensional characters that are just stand-in villains for when they don't have a better idea for who the villain is in this next Avengers story, and nobody gives a damn that one of them is black. Like, it doesn't count in the way people don't identify with that character just because he's like drawn with a skin tone that matches theirs, the way they identify with some of the other black characters, that they have other ways of relating to that character. There are ways to do this that reach people and ways to do it that don't. And more importantly, I just don't think you're ever going to be able to make it work, to find a way to only consume art from people that agree with you. And even if you could, I don't think it's a healthy thing to do. Variety is the spice of life, and being able to see things from a viewpoint that isn't yours is one of the best ways to expand yourself and the way that you see and interact with the world. And moreover, a lot of the time you're talking about Ender's Game, or you're talking about Cyberfrog, or you're talking about, on the other end of the aisle, the New Warriors, or Squirrel Girl was another one that that side liked to throw under the bus when it was running. The thing is, you are not going to be able to do that. And even if you could, I don't think you should want to. Because sometimes you're going to be somebody like me, you're going to get lucky. There's going to be a TV show like Atlanta. Donald Glover is going to make a show that is really crazy deep. Like, if you've watched the show, it's a comedy, but it goes deep. Like, it goes deep, and it's unafraid, and I love it. It speaks to me right at my eye level. But that is a special thing. That is not a thing that's supposed to happen a lot. You just can't count on it. You can't count on seeing something like that. And sometimes I want to watch a dumb comedy. Sometimes I want to watch Trailer Park Boys, or whatever your favorite thing is. That's pretty much what I've got to say about that. Where I want to end this is, I want to say part of why I gravitated away from Marvel Comics when I did was because I find it awkward trying to work these types of issues into a superhero narrative. It's not what the story's about. It's not what people came here for. It's not what the majority of the audience came here for anyway. I mean, not to say that the majority of the audience would begrudge its inclusion. I know I certainly wouldn't when it's done well. But it's just, do you guys remember when Black Panther and Storm got married? Do you remember the issue when Reed Richards and Sue Storm got married, or like, God, I'm sure there's more examples. But my point is, like, hardly anybody talks about, like, oh, my favorite issue of X-Men was when Scott Summers and Jean Grey got married. Like, nobody that's the boring part of the superhero story. I used to watch Inuyasha when I was a kid because it was one of the big things on Adult Swim, and I always hated that when I would turn on a random episode of it, and it was one of the like really feeling story heavy episodes, because I'd be like, ah, dang, I was hoping to watch Inuyasha battle a demon, because that's what, to me, the show was about, and that's what the majority of the show was about. Then there's comic books like Saga that are about two people from it's basically Romeo and Juliet as a sci-fi opera. You know, it's this big messy story that's about people and relationships and drama and war. So when it tackles those issues, it doesn't have to spend any time deviating from what it is as advertised, what people came here for. Then there's stories like Monstrous, which I'm ending on Monstrous because I plan to make a whole video on Monstrous as very soon as my first part of a series I'm going to call "Are You Reading Yet?" Monstrous is great because it's a giant epic world that it's this big magical world that Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda are creating, and every aspect of it is amazing. The writing is amazing. The story, the characters are amazing. The world that it's building is as like it's as epic as Game of Thrones. It really is. And the art is amazing and award winning. And it is the whole world it's creating. One of the quirks that it has is, whereas the norm for comic books is kind of like one female character to every five male characters. The universe of Monstress turns that idea on its head. It's a very matriarchal world where women are very clearly the dominant gender. And it's really interesting because of that, because the world works in some subtly different ways because of that. And it's really interesting to see this huge immersive world that works so differently from ours. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that were thrilled to see it because it's like a lens that they've been waiting to see a story told through for a long time. And that's why those are good examples of ways to affect that without sacrificing still being a great comic book. So I guess in closing, I would like to say I hope I've gotten through to you guys a little bit about why it's important to consider separating art from the artist to an extent. If there's an artist out there that you don't like, they're bigoted in some way, or they're vocally political in a way that is oppositional to your political outlook. If they're out there writing stories that don't have anything to do with the reasons that you don't like them as a person, maybe consider giving them a chance. Because if you go the opposite route, I mean, hey, I'm not going to tell you not to like the New Warriors, but I can't endorse it either. As somebody who was really excited when I heard that they were bringing the New Warriors back, because I loved them. They were one of my favorite teams as a kid. I was really underwhelmed, like almost insulted, because it looked so bad. And that's sad because I don't want Marvel to fail for a lot of reasons. For one, I don't want Marvel to fail because Marvel and DC, the big two, are important pillars of the comic book industry. And if they go away, I don't know how easy it's going to be to transition the entirety of that audience to what might remain in their demise. And also because I don't even like I didn't stop reading because I don't like Marvel or the people that create at Marvel. I stopped reading Marvel because it stopped speaking to me, and I started reading stuff from Image and Dark Horse. Like I kind of always been reading a little bit from both of those companies in the background, but I started really focusing on them because what they were doing now was speaking to me. So I hope I've gotten through to you. I hope maybe I've even talked about something that you hadn't heard of and think looks cool, whether it's Monstrous, Saga, Ender's Game, Cyber Frog, the New Warriors, or now questionably bisexual Wolverine. I mean, I'm not here to tell you what to like. I want to hear what you guys have to say about the topics we discussed. That's one of the things I'm most excited for on this channel. I want to hear what you guys have to say. I want to hear what you think. I want to hear your vehement disagreements, and I want to hear your standing ovations. I want you to tell me what you think, and I don't want you to filter or censor yourself. I really want to hear what my audience thinks. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope you will hit the like button because you enjoyed it. I hope you will hit the subscribe button because you've enjoyed it so much that you want to know when I post my next video so you can join me and discuss the next thing I want to talk about in the world of comic books. This was great. This was super fun, fam. Remember, I'm not the comics fam. You are the comics fam. I'll see you in the next one. Peacy-weace.